So just to introduce this approach coming from Tantra. You know, we can see from the way we're talking, Buddha's talking, you know, emphasis on the power of the mind, that the mind is the creator of our experiences, that what we think and feel and say and do leaves imprints that then produce our future selves, our future experiences. That's it. So when we understand this, then we understand how to become something. You know, so if you want to become a pianist, you keep practicing piano. If you want to become a Buddha, you practice changing your mind. You practice thinking differently. That's the method. That's what you're doing, changing your mind. So the methods in the most advanced practice, there's different ways of looking at the different philosophical approaches, you know, according to the different levels of capability of the practitioner. And as I said, this one Tantra is the most advanced. It's within the Mahayana, so it's based on compassion. And so one way of talking about it is, you know, in relation to the meditations, which are, as Lama Yeshe puts it, are highly technical meditations. The meditators who are working with tantric techniques are learning to become very familiar with their subtler physical and mental energies, learning to harness these. And for a simple reason. Okay, if we look at the approach we're taking now, which is often they call this the sutra approach. You've got the sutra teachings of the Buddha and you've got the tantric teachings of the Buddha. One way of dividing all of Buddha's teachings. You know, the regular general teachings and then the esoteric teachings. Within all the teachings you can divide into another way, which is into the Hinayana and Mahayana. And this is the two wings of the bird idea, you know. The wisdom wing and the compassion wing. And the compassion wing is the Mahayana and Tantra belongs in that. As I've been saying, it's sort of postgraduate, you know. So what you're trying to do, one way of looking at the whole thing, as we've been saying, you've got to try and change your mind. You're changing the way your mind sees things. Because Buddha's saying that over eons of time our minds are just riddled with these misconceptions. That these misconceptions are running the world now, running our minds, running our lives, and they are, as far as we're concerned, they're the reality. What we're seeing through the filter of our delusions now is not reality. We're seeing things in a distorted way, but we think it's true. We think it's how it is. We think it's real. We think our view is the truth. And Buddha's saying that's just misconception. We've got to do a lot of work to deconstruct those misconceptions because those delusions, those neurotic emotions are conceptual. They're based in thoughts. The bare bones of all these emotions, which are what we experience, the level that we experience them at is emotional. And that's just because we've had them for so long. You know, they even affect our physical energy now, you know. But once you start going into your mind through single-pointed concentration meditation, where you're learning to get your mind to become more still, more clear, more refined, more subtle, you really can see how at the very base of all these emotions, it's a story, it's a bunch of concepts about the cake, the person, the thing. So what we need to do is learn to refine the mind to this subtle degree that Buddha says we can get it to, simply because at that level of mind it's extremely capable of doing the deconstructing, of doing the clear seeing, of cutting through all the nonsense. It's like accessing the microscope of your mind to get to the crux of the problems, you know, and then you can do the work of deconstructing the nonsense and literally rid the mind of the delusions. This is the job that needs to be done. So one way of saying it is all Tantra is a set of meditation techniques that are super, super powerful in their capacity to get your mind to this very subtle level. In fact, it's said that the techniques in Tantra are get your mind to a very subtle degree that even the sutra techniques just can't get you to. So it's like this idea of this rocket boost, that gives a very enormous power to the mind to enable it to get to a very subtle level. So you can quickly get rid of the nonsense, quickly deconstruct the misconceptions and see things as they are, realize emptiness and realize get rid of all the misconceptions and see reality as it is, thus cutting the causes of suffering. There's another approach, and it's all skillful psychological techniques really, where you've got, you can depict these different. We've got all these different qualities we're trying to develop. So in the initial stages of practice, you're mainly concerned about getting rid of the delusions. You can talk in the Mahayana wing about developing the qualities. You're still working on the delusions, but the emphasis is on developing this equanimity, which leads eventually to this love and compassion, which leads to bodhicitta. So you're talking about the positive qualities. In the beginning stages, you're talking about getting rid of the delusions in order to become more peaceful, more relaxed, more calm, more friendly, more easygoing. In the more advanced practices in Mahayana, we're talking about actually developing those qualities, the positive qualities. So in Tantra, which is just this set of psychological techniques, like all of Buddhism, there are ways of imagining enlightened mind, which is pure and subtle and unformed, in a form. And the form they have all these different forms that are simply human. Yeah, some have 22 arms and the different colours and things. It's all sort of coming from Hindu tradition, but it's been adopted by Buddhism. And so you've got the different forms in they're different representations. They're representations of the different psychological qualities that we're trying to develop. So for example, this one, the Compassion Buddha, as the very word says, and known in Tibetan as Chenrezig. It's compassionate-eyed one. The Buddha of compassion. So there's a way of depicting compassion so that you visualize that form. It's the Buddha in a certain form, shown as compassion. It's like a visual language that represents compassion. Then you have another one that represents wisdom, and another one that represents kind of this capacity for power, for action, for getting things done that we need to develop. Then all these different qualities we need to develop. You can visualize, imagine, that's all, visualize, imagine this form of the Buddha holding this, looking like that. And then you can say a mantra, you recite a mantra that's like a sound representation of the same quality. So all that is another way of developing that part of yourself. So it's a bit like, people these days, when you hear in sports a lot, they're using these techniques of the little runner would visualize the race. Exactly, she's running the race. She would visualize winning it. She would visualize getting up and climbing onto the middle podium and getting the gold medal. And that's actually a technique to help you achieve it. Well, that's what these meditations are, very simply. And it's not esoteric. If you think about it, if you think every day angry thoughts and anger about people and identify with that anger, and you do it every day, well, it's not rocket science to see that you're developing anger. By thinking about, contemplating, you're meditating on anger basically every day. The word in Tibetan, it's very interesting, the word in Tibetan for the word meditate is the verb to familiarize. So when they say in Tibetan, go meditate on impermanence, go meditate on death, we'll get all kind of cosmic, meditate on death. They're saying, go familiarize your mind with death. Means think about it. This is a kind of meditation. Think about it. So imagining this form, that's okay, it comes from a lineage, it's a certain style, it's Indian, then got brought to Tibet. So for us it's esoteric, but French is esoteric, and as long as you don't know it, when you know it, it's no longer esoteric. You learn to know the meaning of it, you imagine it. you recognize it represents compassion. You say that mantra, and then at some point, like we did with the Vajrasattva one, you absorb it into you. You then imagine you become oneness with that. This is just simply a technique, a psychological technique for you to develop that very quality. That's it, really. It's a method for you to become the Buddha. Another method, that's all. So one way of working on your mind is you look at all the delusions and you rid them. Another way of looking at your mind is you try to develop the qualities. And another way of working on your mind is you imagine the Buddha of compassion, and you do the mantra, then you visualize and you absorb it into you, and you imagine this is you, and so on and so forth. It's just a technique. Okay, it goes into more detail, and there's certain crucial elements to it that as one learns and uses these practices, one understands. But that's the essential meaning. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't know, I forget what we did last year. I always keep putting off doing this one this year. I don't know why. So have you looked at your book at all? Have you looked at it? Okay. So really what Lama's doing in here, Actually, this is the very first course I received from Lama. You'll see. Jen Racing Institute, Tropical Queensland, July the 5th to the 16th, 1976. That was my first course. So giving the background, what it is you see the back of the book, there's a short practice. This is the tradition very much, Lama Yeshe had this text, this little practice called the inseparability of the spiritual master and Avalokitesvara, a source of all powerful attainments. So Avalokitesvara is the Sanskrit, that's all, for the Buddha of compassion, for Chenrezig. And this is a short text, as you see if you've looked at the back in the appendix. Where is it? The first one, Appendix 1. That it's a little sadhana. Sadhana is a Sanskrit word. I don't know what it means exactly, I'm sorry, but it's usually the term that you use to refer to the little book that outlines the practice. Like this is the practice, you see. So this is a sadhana. I don't know what the word exactly means. So this is something that the Dalai Lama wrote when he was 19. As it says here, this sadhana, entitled The Inseparability of the Spiritual Master and Avalokitesvara, a Source of All Powerful Attainments, was composed when His Holiness was 19 years of age and was published in Tibet in the Woodhorse year 1954. This translation was originally made at the wish of Mr. Aung Sim Chai of Malaysia, so the translation into English, and this was done in Sherpa Tulku is one of the translators who worked in Dharamsala in the 1970s, the 60s and 70s, with the Tibetan government set up a publishing arm, and it's still going, called the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, and they translate and publish lots of things into English. So Sherpa Tulku obviously was involved in the translation of this. It was first translated at the request of this Malaysian gentleman. So it's our sincere and deep hope that people, through this practice, will discover a universal means of creating happiness through generating compassion and love for all. May every creature share in its boundless effects. Okay, so thanks also go to Alexander Berzin and Jonathan Landau. That's John down the road who teaches here. And so then you've got the introduction, and basically what this is just this is His Holiness. Yeah, he was requested, was composed. It doesn't say why. Well, here it is. Here, I think it's in here. It says it. It says who asked him, doesn't it? It's awful if it doesn't. It should have. My goodness, what happened? It said one of his students requested him many times to write a little practice that's particularly in the type of practice called guru yoga, deity, yeah, guru yoga. Oh, here, maybe here. Does it give the colophon, does it? Yeah, this has been written at the repeated request of the Assistant Cabinet Minister, Mr. Shankawa Gyume Sonam Tobgel, who, with sincere faith and offerings, asked me to write a simple and complete sadhana of the inseparability of Avalokitesvara and myself. This devotion contains a short glance meditation on the entire graduated path and the mantras of the Master and Avalokitesvara. The term Master here is really, when they did this translation, this is the word for Lama. That's the word they use then. It's often not used in English much among Buddhists. It's never really kind of cottoned on, But this is in the 70s, this is the word they used. It's the word, the Lama. The mantras of the Lama and Avalokitesvara. Although it is improper for me to write such a devotion about myself, waves of inspiration of the Buddhas can be received from ordinary beings, just as relics can come from a dog's tooth. There's this story. What he means by that? You see, the thing is, the Dalai Lama is said to be the Buddha, but of course he's not going to say he is. He just sort of says he's an ordinary person. So this story about the business of the dog's tooth is interesting. I'll tell you about that. Therefore I have composed this with the hope of benefiting a few faithful disciples. The Buddhist monk Nawang Losang Tenzin Gyatso. Because he's seen as the emanation of Chenrezig, you know. He's accepted as the emanation, that himself is actually a fully developed Buddha and is an emanation of the Buddha of compassion. This is how he's known among the Tibetans. So there's a certain kind of practice. Okay, this is getting us back now, I think, to the practice of guru devotion. This is really getting to a very tasty way of describing the relationship with the Lama. Okay, this is where we can understand it at the so-called religious level, the devotional level, which is the heart level. As I said, we have a human heart, and as Lama Yeshe says, we're dying to be loved. You know. So why not use all that energy in a very positive, constructive way? So, okay, one of the key practices, as I said, is to train our minds to develop the habit of thinking that ordinary person out there who looks like a regular human being, you know, who goes to the toilet like I do and sleeps and eats and all these things, you know, maybe picks their nose and wears glasses and looks like they get angry sometimes. You can be forgiven for thinking they're just an ordinary person like you. This is the interesting point. If you think of Christianity, Jesus, you know, Jesus is what they say, God made man. Isn't it? He's actually the manifestation of God. So they have all these discussions, I know, in the different Christian religions. But as a Catholic, this is a teaching, that he was God manifesting in a human form for the sake of beings. Well, this is exactly the Bodhisattva idea, the idea of what a Bodhisattva, or finally the Buddha, is. You know, you're bopping along on your path, and you've still got delusions. You're an ordinary sentient being. You're not a superior being yet. You haven't realized emptiness yet. You haven't gotten out of samsara yet. So you keep bopping and you keep practicing virtue so you can be assured of a decent life. But eventually, once you've realized emptiness and you've cut the root of the delusions, which is what you do in your single-pointed concentration, which is the purpose, as I said, of all these meditations, to get you to the subtle level so you can deconstruct the delusions and get rid of them and get out of samsara, quit creating negative karma, thus find happiness. You then, you know, once you're doing this job, bopping along, and eventually you get to the point where you don't need yourself to be reborn, because when you've cut the root of delusions, you cut the root of needing to be reborn. Because we're reborn now, we're propelled by the motor of ego grasping. That's the motor that propels us from life to life. We're propelled into another birth. Sometimes a happy one, sometimes a suffering one. There's no choice about it. But once you've cut ego, once you've realized emptiness and cut ego, cut the delusions, cut the root, then there's no motor to propel you to be reborn. Now, if you've achieved just the wisdom wing, you've achieved what they call this, you're achieving your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering. Cessation, nirvana means cessation. You've cut your suffering. So then you're just doing on the wisdom wing. For life after life after life, you're propelled by the motivation of renunciation. I must quit suffering. I must quit suffering. You've got that motivation so strongly. And so then when you die, then your consciousness is still existing, but there's no longer the motor to cause it to get reborn again. You've cut all that. So you just are remaining in a state of bliss. The mind just remains in the state of pure, formless bliss. It's its nature. That's how mind is when it's unencumbered and unformed. It's just pure, subtle bliss when it's pure. But if you've practiced the compassion wing as well as the wisdom wing, you get to the point where you don't need to get reborn. But because you're motivated by this bodhicitta, by this huge wish, this determination, based on compassion, I must become a Buddha to benefit sentient beings. I must become a Buddha. Why? Because your compassion for them is so huge. There's so much suffering. And it's like the suffering of your precious children. You'll do nothing until they're better. You will never give up. You won't ever forget about them. So this is the compassion of the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva is a person who's well and truly on the way to being a Buddha, on the path to Buddhahood. It hasn't achieved it yet. But by the point that you've given up delusions and you've got this bodhicitta, you're still not a Buddha, but you don't need to be reborn. But you will be reborn because you want to be. because this bodhicitta propels you to. You choose to be reborn. Like I mentioned about Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the reincarnate Lama, you know. You would say that he completely controlled the process of death by utilizing these tantric methods and literally was able to plan his rebirth. They have such control. They know exactly how to die and they know exactly how to choose their new birth, you know. So this is the Bodhisattva one. And so there's this tradition in Tibet, you know, of recognizing reincarnated lamas, as they say. The term in Tibetan for this is tulku, which just means emanation body. So it's the form these advanced minds manifest in for the sake of sentient beings. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche is called a tulku. He was formally recognized by the local lama as indeed the reincarnation of that mind of Kunsang Yeshe, the previous meditator, you know. So he's known, the term in Tibetan of respect that's given to these people is the term of Rinpoche. It means precious one. Actually, the Lama who sits here, the one who's here, who's going to give refuge tonight, he's called Kensur Rinpoche, and that's a title of respect to all the ex-abbots. Kensur means former abbot. When I studied with him, he was just known as Geshe Tekchok. He's not formally known as a Rinpoche because of rebirth. He's just called Kensur Rinpoche. It's a term of respect to anybody who's been the abbot of a monastery. So he's known as Kensur Rinpoche. It's a title, actually. So it's not his name. His name is Jumpa Tekchok. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he was recognized as a little boy, formally recognized by the local Lama as the same mind as that Kunsang Yeshe who was chosen to be reborn as little Zopa, you know? And so he's known as Rinpoche. This is just a title of respect. So Dalai Lama is a reincarnate Lama. As we know, maybe from seeing Kundun or reading his biography, he's the 14th. It's not as if his mind began in the first one. It's just that they established this sort of institution, really, of recognizing formally reincarnate lamas. It's been happening for a few hundred years in Tibet. So he's formally recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama, his mind. You know, they do searches, they check up, they, you know, consult the meditators. They have this kind of this method. And I'll talk about that when they talk about, I'll mention how they found Lama Yeshe, for example, the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe. He's a Spanish boy, as I mentioned, 22 years old now. So this business of being reborn, choosing to be reborn. So then, of course, if a person's highly developed, let's say you've gone beyond delusions, you don't need, you know, a walking sewer to live in. You've gone beyond the need for that. Your energy's so pure and so subtle. You understand? You don't need to be in a human form. So then technically you could say you're not a human being. Because if you define a human being as one of the realms of existence, which is due to delusions born in the desire realm, okay, virtue got you to that, but you're still caught up in delusions because you haven't realized emptiness yet. So you have this very gross body that, you know, and the gross airs and the winds and the delusions. Then clearly you're a deluded person. But if you no longer are deluded, no longer have ego, gone beyond the delusions, and to whatever degree of compassion have developed, you know, on this bodhisattva path, then you very simply would say, you're like an angel. You're like what the Christians would call an angel, but you can manifest in a human form. Just like the concept of God and Jesus is a perfect one, very comfortable. So strictly speaking then, you could say a person who is that isn't a human being. But they've got to look like a human being for our sake. We're a bit freaked out. They're walking around. We wouldn't see them. Rinpoche mentioned this, 2 days ago. We wouldn't see them if they manifested in a pure, subtle form, which is what they are. We wouldn't see them because our minds are too gross. So they manifest consciously. They take a birth in a womb and they look like, they become a human being for our sake, but they're not themselves technically a human being, which means a deluded person. They've just got the form. They're like play acting as a human being. So if you can imagine, if you can think that through, and one has to think this through, to how that is possible, then you would say, let's say, all the lamas say the Dalai Lama is the Buddha. Now I can't say he is, because I can't see that. I'm not a Buddha. I can't see. You only see what you know, can't you? At any level of anything. But I'm prepared to, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, you know, I don't know, so I'll leave it there. But he is said to be a fully enlightened Buddha. So if he's a fully enlightened Buddha, but he's in a human form, but he looks like a human, doesn't he? He goes to sleep, I bet he goes to the toilet, you know. So then it's easy for us to think, well, he's just an ordinary human being. And this is this whole point I'm getting at about practicing seeing your guru as the Buddha. So clearly if the guru is the Buddha, and you're thinking this, then obviously this is the point. If they are a pure person, if they have gone beyond delusions, then it's not possible that when they're looking like they're being angry that it's coming from a delusion. It's not possible. It's a method that he's using for your benefit. So you have to think about this, because our delusions immediately point the fingers and immediately find fault and get hurt and start criticising and whatever, whatever. That's what the delusions do. So one has to think about this very clearly, you know. There's logic to it, according to this whole structure we're discussing here. It makes sense completely. So the practice is to see the Guru as the Buddha. And who gets the advantage there is not the Guru. He doesn't need it. It's to your advantage. It's very obvious. If you sit there going, oh, isn't he a creep? Oh, God, what a pathetic person. Guess who gets no benefit? Guess who pollutes their own mind? You. Because our view is what causes our mind to develop or not. So if you're having a pure view, this is the Buddha, then guess who gets the benefit? You. And you get the benefit of as if it were the Buddha, because you're hearing it in this way, and you get that benefit. It kind of makes sense, you know, it's psychologically very sound. But it's just that we have to think about it carefully, because we're so caught up in putting everything into the object, you know. We give all the power to the person, the object. We just think we're this recipient of things. But we're the ones who do the thing, you know. So it's our view that causes us to progress or not. So there's a particular practice then in Tantra where it's to increase this view of the Guru being the Buddha. And then because you're meditating, and you know, if you're advanced in it, of course, you're doing it at a subtle level, and you can experience great devotion, and it can be very powerful to help your mind get more subtle in order to get the realizations. And so there's a kind of practice called Guru Yoga. And there's two ways of doing this. There's two ways in Tantra of meditating on the deities, as they call it. The Buddha deity. Deity is a term used in Tantra that's synonymous with the word Buddha, basically. One is, you would imagine the Buddha in that form, let's say Chenrezig. He's got a white light body, he's holding this, he's got that, he's got an antelope skin over his chin, he's sitting on a white lotus, he's got 4 hands. There's all these very specific things that he's holding. And that's a particular point in itself, you know. This visualization is a very specific, you know, visualization, and everything he's holding, everything that's there has a meaning. Just like a letter in a word. You've got to have the letters in the right order, and those letters all together mean that, don't they? Compassion. You can't just spell it any way you like, no one will recognize it. So each letter plays its role. Well, it's like that in a sense. It's a visual language. And like I said, it's an esoteric for us initially, but when you get used to it, it's not esoteric. It becomes meaningful. And so that overall visualization, like the antelope skin, because the antelopes are said to be peaceful, so it represents his kindness. The holding 4 hands represents something else. The crystal rosary represents this. That represents that. The peaceful face represents something else. Each thing represents something, and overall is the presentation, is the visualization that is representing the Buddha of compassion. So you would imagine that. And then you would think, like we did the Vajrasattva last night, this is the mind of my Lama manifesting as Chenrezig for my benefit. You'd think like that. In other words, my Lama's mind and the Buddha's mind, they're the same thing. It's a very tasty practice. Now the other way to practice, and this is even more tasty, and it makes it more personal, more close to the heart, and that's this kind of practice, is you visualize the Guru in his own form. So clearly it's fairly stylized. There's a line drawing in here somewhere, I think. Yeah, where is it? They've cut his little head off. There's a bigger line. There has to be the line drawing somewhere here. Don't tell me it's not been put in. Oh my goodness, I thought it was here. Must be here. This is it? Thank goodness, yes, there it is. Oh, it's not a very good rep. Anyway, there it is. You see, it's very elaborate looking. You see, he's got a little pointy hat. That's the Gelugpa style, the yellow pointy hat. He's got his 50. You see, he's sitting on a very elaborate throne. You like this type of thing. This is traditional, you know, this type of throne here, and it's kind of elaborate with a little thing in the front and the snow lines holding it up, and his little desk to the right with his little kind of different things on it. And he's holding in his left hand. You see, that's a wheel. representing turning the wheel of Dharma, and his right hand is holding this text with a little sword on it. See, that represents, I think that's the Prajnaparamita, the text of wisdom, and that sword is like the sword of Manjushri, who is the Buddha of wisdom, and the sword represents cutting through the delusions. So that's meant to be a depiction of the Dalai Lama. You can't really tell, can you, when he was young, obviously. But so in other words, when you visual, this is just a line drawing, but if you're a really good meditator and you've really got advanced, stages, and you'd actually imagine, you'd see it vividly. You'd see your own Lama. You'd see them in their form. You'd see them in their form. Because that's the one it's very personal. It's very personal. It seems a bit abstract to see this person, with a white light body and everything. So you imagine your own Lama in their form. And then, as the sadhana would say, and doesn't show it here, at his heart, you visualize, really tiny, at his heart is Chenrezig. So this is the meditations, and I'm going to ask, Chogki to lead you tomorrow morning, and we'll do the rest of the mornings doing this meditation. Different ways. There's lots of different ones. Lama, during the course, he led us through. I mean, they're all very complex and rather unusual for our minds, but they've all got extraordinary meaning. Like anything, as I said, it's esoteric until you get used to it. You see, if you go to page 20, you're going to see the typical depiction of Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion. You see, there he is with his 4 hands. The first 2 in the front are holding this, what they call a wish-fulfilling jewel. He's got 2 other hands. One is holding a crystal rosy and the other one's holding a lotus. Then you see that antelope skin over his left shoulder. And he's sitting in full lotus position. Each of these things has this meaning, This decorations, the earrings and everything. And this is the Buddha of compassion. Meant to be the embodiment of compassion, So you'd imagine that at his heart. So the great meditators can do that. They can get unbelievably refined, subtle level of mind, and they can imagine the tiniest detail. They say the mind is very capable when it gets more subtle. We wouldn't even imagine how capable, actually. The level of conceptual clarity and brilliance and visual clarity that we can get when the mind is really subtle. It's like it's almost unimaginable when we hear about what they can do when you get your mind more subtle, which we have the potential, all of us, to achieve. And there's a great reason to do this, because then you can really, like a knife, like a laser, can cut through all the misconceptions with your very refined conceptual mind. So when you're visualizing, you'd visualize the Guru in his own form, and then you'd visualize the Buddha, in this case Chenrezig, at his heart. And so this sadhana is very short, got a bunch of different prayers in it. That's the visualization, as they say. That's the visualization. And it's a kind of a tasty kind of practice of Guru Yoga. Does that make sense? And again, it's all esoteric, I keep saying that, but just keep remembering, it's all to do with your mind. All you're doing across the board, from beginning to end, is using different techniques to help you get your mind to become, finally, who it really is, which is fully developed, your own Buddha, fully developed in all the positive qualities. That's the purpose of every single practice from A to Z. To develop your mind to perfection, which Buddha says is our natural potential. And these are just these elaborate, and for us unusual, and sometimes extremely complex. This is a very simple one. Extremely complex methods, that say have been coming from India since the time of after the Buddha, all the way down through Tibet, especially in Tibet. These practices, they didn't really go to any other countries. A little bit in other countries, but completely extant. The whole one of the tantric philosophy and the tantric practices is extant in Tibet. So the other element that's crucial to this whole approach is the understanding of emptiness. The understanding of emptiness, insofar as your self is not inherently this or that. And so it's if you really concretely imagine that you are definitely Robina from her own side, this is concretely who I am, innately human, innately this, then of course to visualize yourself as the Buddha of compassion, it seems like just play acting. But the point is here, all these are very tasty methods for how to access that part of yourself, to how to grow that part of yourself, based on the fact that yourself is not concrete. If it were, then clearly you couldn't do it. If your self was stuck in what it is, which is what we think, it can't change, which is what we think. We think it can't change. That's what makes us so miserable. We think we're locked into this one, and then we cling to it, you know. But there's no inherent anything in anything. And that is why things can change. This is even why we can become a Buddha. You can become a Buddha because your mind is empty of existing from its own side. This is the reason. Things exist because they're empty of existing from their own side. They exist because they are dependent arisings. Because if you do this and this and this, you'll get that. That's dependent arising. Things exist within that. And so the understanding of emptiness and eventually the meditating on and the realizing of emptiness is what brings you the success in these practices. And so this talk of Mahamudra that Lama is discussing is just another way of describing emptiness. Mahamudra is a term, it means great seal. It's just a term that's used to refer to the emptiness of your own mind, specifically. That's all. Everything has the characteristic of being not inherent. Everything exists in that same way. That is the ultimate nature of everything that does exist. Everything doesn't have an inherent nature. Nothing exists inherently. That emptiness of existing inherently is the way everything exists. But the way it's referred to in certain techniques, certain meditations, the way it's referred to when you refer to the emptiness of your own mind, it's known as Mahamudra. That's all. So they have, all the traditions have these particular practices of learning to see the ultimate nature of your own mind. And so in the Nyingmapas they call it Dzogchen, although it's a bit different there. Dzogchen. And in the Kargyupas and the Galupas they call it Mahamudra. Mahamudra, great seal. And Lama talks about it in here. And so all the way through here, the theme is emptiness. The whole way through Lama's talking, it's emptiness, 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 emptiness. So I'm just going to randomly pick something and just read a bit of Lama to you, okay? So before I do that, the first part, as you see, the first part is Lama, there's 3 parts, let me just see how we divide it, 3 parts, yes. Part 1 is just the background, Lama gives background. Then part 2, Lama gives a really brief commentary on the sadhana. Very brief, goes through it, you know. Goes through the commentary. So that's helpful just to read that so you can get a sense of the sadhana, because you'll do the sadhana in the mornings with Venerable Chogki. And then the third part 3 is Lama just sort of going through the practice, adding new stages to the meditation, and they're all, you can see how they're laid out in a different way, and then they're all together in the back, about 8 or 9 of them, and then just going through them, describing different things, you know. See, one of Lama's great skills, actually, Tantra, traditionally speaking, you know, if you go to the monasteries, let's say you're a little monk, you go to the monastery, you're going to be doing some practices that you could say are from Tantra, but you won't really be taking any initiations or any empowerments into these practices until you're quite advanced, and you won't get teachings on it until you're quite advanced. But Lama Yeshe, somehow he said, Westerners, we kind of have a way of understanding, because we have such a sophisticated, kind of neurotic sophisticated, but nevertheless sophisticated understanding of energy and things, you know. We're into things. And so Tantra is very much about transforming energy. And so because he said we have this sense of understanding that, he always felt that Tantra was very helpful for us from day one. He would teach us this stuff from day one, you know. He simplified certain quite advanced meditations and got us doing them, because he really felt they were very good for our mind, you know. This brings us to another aspect of Tantra. Well, another way of looking at the different stages of practice is all in terms of how you deal with the delusions. So at the first level, because the delusions are the problem, they're what make your mind go berserk, and because you're so uncontrolled, don't go anywhere near the delusions yet, like we've been talking. You just deal with your body and speech. You back away from the object. You control your body and speech. Don't go there. Don't engage in it. By the time you've got a bit of control over this, your body and speech, you can then, like in the second scope, you go into your mind and you really begin to understand the delusions. And you learn to let go of the delusions. You learn to let go of the attachment, to go beyond the attachment, to deconstruct it, to go against the attachment. You're mainly working on your body and speech, like you're doing all this training, you know, moulding your mind into a brand new mind, getting rid of all the junky delusions, especially attachment. You get rid of the attachment, okay? You're no longer in the thrall of that object. You're no longer kind of dragged by the nose, you know? You've really conquered. You've controlled your body and speech, and you've really got a harness on your mind now because you've lessened the attachment to the point of, let's say, even giving it up. You become a really advanced person. Then you can go to the compassion wing. And now you can sort of happily engage in the objects that normally would make your mind crazy. Because your attachment's now gone, you have compassion now for others, and you'd happily engage in it for the sake of others. Compassion is now at the forefront of your mind, not attachment. Right now it's attachment. Even the good things we do now are motivated mostly by attachment. At the level when you've given up attachment and you're up to the level of compassion wing, you can really do things for the sake of others now, and you won't get disturbed by things. But even more than this, you can actually, you know, you actually are able, through using Tantra, to energize that attachment. Or strictly speaking, engage in attachment objects, thus energizing the pleasure that is triggered by that attachment object, as Lama Yeshe puts it, without your mind going berserk. It's like dangerous. It's like dangerous territory. If you have attachment and you engage in a very strong attachment object, your mind is berserk. You lose it, you know, because attachment's so powerful. So if you've given it up, you've given up the neurotic delusion, you've still got a body, you've still got senses, and the connecting with an object still triggers an experience of pleasure. This is just the natural human state. Well, there's something about Tantra that this understanding of the subtler energies, there's some very specific, powerful quality about bliss that enables the mind to get to a very subtle state very quickly. So the great yogis engage, you could say, in either through visualization or whatever, they energize the attachment. No, they don't have the attachment technically. They energize the bliss, which normally makes our mind go berserk because we're so uncontrolled and so greedy, you know. But they don't have attachment, so they can do it easily. And so that enables their mind go to a very subtle level so that they can then use their mind to get the realizations very quickly. That's a very specific benefit, of a specific function in Tantra. So did you understand those words? And I'd like you to ask questions if you didn't, because it's really important you don't misunderstand. Yeah.
Is there an object when that kind of meditation is?
I understand. Mostly speaking, in your meditation, you know, you would, and this is where, of course, you talk when you see all that, you know, the main object that's used in your meditation is the object of visualizing a consort. You're visualizing you're in union with a consort. This is the advanced stages of Tantra. So in other words, you're utilizing what we would imagine as sexual union, what we call sexual union. Because why? Because that's the most intense bliss, isn't it? It's the most intense one, probably, unless you're a furry. You get my point here. Joking, but I'm not joking. It energizes the most powerful bliss. So clearly, when the mind is berserk, it's the most powerful attachment, and so therefore it's the most powerful negative karma, because you're making your mind berserk. But when you've gone beyond attachment, you haven't, you know, when you've gone beyond attachment, which is a delusion, and you eat cake, your tongue hasn't fallen out. You're still going to have a sensory experience, right? And it's going to trigger pleasure, isn't it? That's still going to be there. But you've just chucked out the poison. Now the pleasure you will have is much more pleasurable anyway. But your mind, because you have no longer any attachment, you won't be like the junkie. You'll have absolute control over your mind. Just think simply. Think of a piece of cake even. Forget sexual union. Come on. You see my point? And we even know this. You know that one day you eat the cake really greedily. You don't even remember having it. But one other day you're more spacious, you know, you think about it and you offer it to others and you really enjoy it. You can enjoy it more because your mind is less grasping. So if you can imagine you're a person who's gone beyond, you've cut the delusions, you've finished the delusions, you've gone beyond attachment, then there's no problem with engaging in an object. It won't make your mind berserk. You won't go crazy. It will not be a problem. Remember, Geshe Rinpoche mentioned the king who raped this gorgeous-looking Arhat nun. And he said, he happened to mention that she didn't create any downfall. She didn't break her vow. Because why? Because nothing happened in her mind, because she had complete control over her mind. She had no attachment and realised emptiness. So having the stick inside her, as he put it, how boring, There was no delusion risen in her mind, Do you understand my point? Because she had no attachment, no delusion, no fantasy, no projections, no expectations, and she was anyway blissful. Because when you've got no attachment, you're blissful in yourself. So then you see everything as it is, and so that you demystify everything. So then you can have the cake, and it would be a blissful experience, but it would not energize any delusion. It couldn't possibly do this. So it would be the same all the way to the most intense experience of bliss, which is the one, as I said, of having sexual union. You wouldn't lose any control. You'd experience infinite more bliss, but your mind would be absolutely stable. I mean, this is inconceivable to us, but this is the point. Can you hear my point here? Can this make sense to people, just psychologically speaking? Well, this is what this concept, this idea is used in Tantra. Because it's recognized, because there's this very sophisticated understanding in tantric teachings from the Buddha, and then of the nature of all these procedures in a subtle level of our subtle energy, subtle mind and subtle wind energies, and other subtle physical energies. And so these, as Lama Yeshe says, these meditations are highly technical, and so the yogis are able to utilize and transform these subtle levels of their own energy and they meditate on the Buddha in certain of the practices with a consort, and they actually visualize themselves as simply a method, that's it, as a technique, to energize that level of bliss, in order then to get the mind to the very subtle level, in order to realize emptiness and cut all the delusions. It's just simply a technique. It's a very elaborate technique. You get my point here? That's it. That's what it is, really. So you've got to hear it very clearly and very simply, not sort of not get all dramatic about it. Because there's so much talk and so many books published about tantric sex and all this stuff, and it's just kind of grotesque in its misunderstanding. This is a highly sophisticated thing. I mean, it's kind of interesting because all it's doing, Tantra is utilizing the qualities of the human physiology, basically, which they understand in a very specific way in terms of these subtle energies, which, of course, as I said, Tibetan medicine is based on this level of understanding. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's kind of extremely interesting. So, of course, these teachings are called esoteric, secret, because you need to be qualified to hear them properly. And I mean, here I am talking about it, but Lama Yeshe, this is Lama Yeshe. I'm his, I'm his daughter. So I'm attempting to try and make it clear to us so we can hear about it psychologically. Just hear it psychologically. Do you understand? Does that make sense? Yep.
I have a question. So, at the point when you experience bliss,
enables your mind to get very subtle. That's all. The bliss is like a rocket boost that enables your mind to go to a very subtle level. And why you want to go to a very subtle level is because at that level, where it's beyond the usual concepts, you can cut through all the nonsense and realize emptiness and get rid of all the delusions. That's all. That's all. Do you see? So, they talk all the time, therefore, about male Buddhas and the female Buddhas and the male energy and the female energy, because we have these two, And this is also another aspect is in this tradition, you would do, each person as they progress would take initiations into these practices as and when they're ready, And then you would eventually, based upon, interestingly, knowing your own delusions, you would then find a particular affinity with a certain Buddha, a certain practice, because another level of these Buddhas, in the way that I said before, that you've got the different Buddhas that represent the qualities you want to try and develop, like love and compassion and wisdom. You've also got Buddhas at another level, another deities, who are manifestations of the very qualities, of a purified aspect of the qualities you're trying to purify, get rid of. You with me? So Vajrayogini, this red Buddha, this gorgeous female red Buddha, she's a manifestation of purified desire. There's another one like Yamantaka, who's really fierce. He's the manifestation of purified kind of anger. So by meditating on these ones, you purify that part of yourself. Does that make sense? So the key to all of this, as Lama's talking constantly, is the understanding of emptiness. Without emptiness, it's meaningless and not possible. And of course renunciation. So they'd say the minimum qualities to want to practice Tantra, to be qualified to practice Tantra, to even engage in practicing it, not achieving it even, is to have very strong renunciation, a real understanding of all the first stages of the practice, to know what the earth you're doing. You've got to get rid of the delusions. Why? Because they're the poison. My goodness. Then you've got to have a very strong understanding of emptiness, that nothing has an inherent nature. And of course bodhicitta. They say in fact bodhicitta is the main one. Well, you couldn't do it without emptiness, and you couldn't have emptiness without renunciation, so they all fit together. But the huge wish to benefit others is what propels these great lamas to go off and meditate for 20, 30 years and never sleep and never eat and do whatever they do with phenomenal energy, you know. It's compassion that drives them. They're bodhicitta that drives them. So Choki, I thought we could, in the mornings, we could do the meditation. I think I'm just going to read a bit here and read a bit more in the afternoon, and we just start, just do the sadhana, read it out, and people can meditate on it with you, or do it with you, or you just lead it and they meditate on it. And this is what the people found last year. I think Thea said they just found it so sweet, you know, really sweet. We can do it for every morning, the rest of the mornings now. It's not many left, is it? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 4 mornings. Okay. And then, yeah, okay. So I just read a bit of Lama here. So, okay, as I said, the second part is a commentary, a brief commentary on the practice itself. And then the third part is Lama just talking, you know, guiding us through different stages of the practice and talking about emptiness and the meaning of these things and the different qualities we need to develop in our understanding. So here's the chapter called Tantra, Using Delusions, okay? So that might be useful to read. What is reality? Okay, let's see, what is this? So, yeah, just making ordinary actions divine. Lama talks here. So just listen if you want to. The powerful path of Tantra takes all the energy of desire. Attachment is synonymous with desire, basically. And instead of rejecting it like poison, brings it into the path of liberation. Normally we avoid poison as much as we possibly can, but in Tantra we use it as a powerful medicine. Tibetan doctors use many different natural substances, including poisons, to make medicine. In this way, poison can become highly beneficial. I'm sure that Western medicine once did the same thing, but today chemicals have probably made the use of poison in medicine unnecessary. If all you've studied up to now has been Lam Rim, you can see that Tantra has an entirely different approach to Dharma practice. The Lam Rim teaches you to renounce and reject attachment, anger, jealousy, and so forth. Perhaps you're starting to think, wow, these lamas are crazy. Sometimes they squeeze me by saying, if you follow desire, you'll create negative karma and experience only suffering. And now they're saying it's okay to follow desire. Take it into the path and it'll liberate you. Now you probably don't know which path to take. So, however, taking the energy of desire into the path does not mean that you can just do whatever you like. It means that instead of trying to escape any situation that arises, you can deal skillfully with it. You can transform everything that arises in your everyday life, every condition and situation, all your desire, into the path of liberation. Instead of bringing you down, any kind of negative energy can now help you reach enlightenment. But you should check this through with your own experience, not just through my words. Still, you can now see why we say that Tantra can be dangerous. Even transforming the simple pleasure of your breakfast muesli. We used to have muesli every morning there. You can do it, but you have to practice constantly, from morning to night and from sleep to awakening, transforming everything you do into pure action. Think about how you are when you get up in most mornings. I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm suffering, and your mind goes straight into your coffee. Instead of starting your day like that, imagine that Chenrezig is there, Avalokitesvara is there, waking you up by sending powerful, radiant white light directly into your consciousness. Then he sinks into you and suddenly you become Avalokitesvara. Think, I'm very lucky still to be alive this morning, so today I will transform all the energy of my body, speech and mind into the blissful path of liberation. May everything I do become a divine action of Avalokitesvara. Dedicate everything you do for the benefit of all sentient beings. It takes only a few moments to start the day by thinking this way. So then you get up with a mantra and transform everything else you do. When you wash, you imagine you're washing your divine body with blissful energy instead of washing your mundane, suffering body with water. Then you dress your divine body with blissful divine robes instead of with ordinary clothes. If you start your morning like that, the rest of your day will be much easier. So then we'll think, we could think, well, that's just fantasy. What are we doing? It sounds like attachment. But it's interesting. There's difference, Attachment is a fantasy because it's coming from a complete neurosis and grasping and desperate. and then manipulates others and expects things to be a certain way, and that gets devastated when they turn out not to be that way, which is what they're not anyway. So if you imagine yourself, you every day, you every day imagine you're miserable. You imagine I'm mean, I'm ugly, I'm too fat, I'm too this. So that's awful. What does that do but drag you down, That drags you down. If you have anger and have depression, but you exaggerate it and you think the whole of you is awful because of this is not accurate. So instead of that, you can start identifying with your positive qualities. You identify with your potential. It's like that little athlete imagining themselves running the race as a method for doing it. So if every day you think of your good qualities, and every day you identify yourself with those, and you imagine you're the Buddha, because when you take initiations, this is part of your commitment, is you visualize yourself, you imagine yourself as that Buddha, then that's a technique to become it, because it's your potential. So it's, in a sense, it's using fantasizing, if you like, but it's using it in a really constructive way. We use fantasizing now in a destructive way. You see my point here? So the technique of imagining something is not itself wrong. It's an important thing to think about. Get my point? And because every thought you have leaves a seed, and then you reinforce that thing. Then, of course, thinking about your anger and your hopelessness and your self-hating every day, well, guess what you'll become? Exactly that. So this is the point that Buddha's making. Our mind makes us what we are. Ignorance thinks that someone else made it. Ignorance thinks it's there inherently. That's the mistake. But if we can imagine we're not inherently this or that, we can become that. So you think that, and think the positive one, because that's what you do want to become. You do want to become loving and compassionate and wise, so you think that one. So you're using your fantasy, but in a positive way. This is much of what visualization is. That's all it is, really, using your creative imagination. Like for your lunch, you imagine you offer it to all beings. Don't underestimate that. That's your mind. You created unbelievable virtue just by putting those thoughts into your mind. So you're using fantasy, but it's in a good way. This is what this is really. And if you think about it, it makes sense. So then after that, when you go to breakfast, you bless everything that you eat and you drink so that it becomes blissful, radiant, light energy. Then you offer it to the divine, universal, compassion, wisdom, Avalokitesvara. But you are Avalokitesvara. Avalokita is not outside you. Or if you prefer, you can visualize Avalokitesvara in your heart, or you can make offerings to Guru Avalokitesvara. The Guru seen as inseparably one with Avalokitesvara. From the moment you wake up, you should transform everything. In other words, all you're doing is thinking differently. Buddha is a cognitive therapist, and I'm really not joking here, but just a really amazing, outrageous, radical one. Because Buddha says, up until now, what we are has come from our thinking that. Our thinking has made us who we are since beginningless time. Our thinking, our new thinking, is what will literally make us the Buddha. It's almost so simple it's embarrassing. But it's because we grasp at me as self-existent that we don't believe this, because we buy into the self-existent, hopeless, mean, fat, ugly, hopeless, pathetic me, which is the real me that plods through the door every day and we keep seeing as the same one. But that's a fantasy. So that thinking is what makes us this mean, ugly, unhappy person. So our positive thinking is what makes us eventually the Buddha. Everything is made by the mind, Buddha says. And that's what all they mean by emptiness. There's nothing cosmic. That self-existent, concrete, solid, miserable me is not inherent in me. That's all. It's not set in stone. So that's why we can change. So emptiness is, because things are empty, they can change. This is what it means, It's just practical psychology. Very amazing, if you're brave enough to do it. It's so easy, it's embarrassing. But we're addicted to negative thoughts. That's what's so ironic. It's so awful. We're addicted to being miserable, but we think everybody else is making us miserable, but we're the one doing it. 27 people can tell you they love you. Oh, yeah. Begging to hear it again, but not believing it. One person says they don't love you. Which one do you run to like a magnet? It's so obvious. Why? Because that's the one you believe. So you dare to blame other people because you think you're a creep. Because you think it yourself. This is the incredible irony of it, This whole process has to do with awakening our mind. Our usual actions are like those of a cow, but when we transform them, they become divine and beyond normal conceptions. Of course, if we do not have some understanding of the nature of reality, of emptiness, that things don't exist as self-entities, it's difficult to transform ordinary energy into blissful energy. But for those who understand emptiness, it is easy. When you transcend ordinary experience, each time you drink, for example, you energize your Avalokitesvara nervous system, and this blissful experience brings you psychological satisfaction. When you bless your food at lunchtime and transform it into the universal blissful energy of the divine view of Avalokitesvara's divine consciousness, you completely change the relationship between the physical energy of the food and yourself. Try it, and you'll experience what I'm telling you. Well, it's lunchtime, so there you go. We can think of it as just these oceans of blissful nectar, not in the nature of carrots and rice and this and that, you know. It's completely empty. And we visualize Om Ahung, Om Ahung, Om Ahung, these three essential Sanskrit syllables that kind of melt into it and bring the energy of the body, speech and mind of all the holy beings into it, transforming it into oceans of blissful nectar. And then the main thing, as Rinpoche says, is you now offer it. You visualize, imagine offering all the Buddhas, all the holy beings, and all the suffering sentient beings throughout space. And they all you imagine them all experiencing the pleasure of receiving it. Lama Sangye, Lama Che, Dejen Lama Gedonte, Kungi Jepo Lama Te Lama Namla Che Pabul. And then you happily eat now. Thoroughly enjoy. So then your discussion, I think just take this one, begin to take this, I think nice to talk about. Yeah, I think talk about this one. See if you can get a bit of an understanding of how attachment isn't pleasure. Try to, I mean, it's almost impossible for us to actually, when we have even a cup of tea, it's almost impossible to distinguish. But intellectually, to understand it is a very good first step. So just talk about that. Try and see how you can see that attachment is the neurotic craving, neediness to get the thing and the anticipation of it. And then there's the pleasure is the simple triggering based on the senses. It's an interdependent scenario, you know. Based on having a tongue and you meet the cake, there's a momentary pleasure experience. So try and see how they are different. And so therefore how you can imagine not having attachment, you can still have the pleasure. In fact, more. That's the irony. More blissful mind. That's the irony, you know, when you've given up attachment. You don't chuck out pleasure when you give up attachment. And that's the tragedy when people misunderstand religion. We end up becoming fundamentalists. Miserable, miserable, miserable people, and pleasure is bad. Do you understand? But then we get the other extreme and we think, oh, we're allowed to have pleasure, so we become like hungry vampires again. So we've got to get, again, this really refined, precise understanding of it, you know. Just try and discuss that, I think. Might be a good idea. Okay. See you at 4.